Hello and welcome to MMO development. So, today we are going to wrap up CGS. Now, the margin stuff is... it's really being a pain. As we can see, if we jump over here, fire up what we have been working on, we do have issues with our margins being calculated for the margin auto, but that's not an important thing for us to spend a whole lot of time on. I really want to see this starting to be used in an actual project rather than spending a whole lot of time working on things that are causing issues with the way that Unity's GUI currently works. So today what we're going to do is we're going to wrap everything up. We're going to get our IL merging done correctly in such a way that doesn't cause Unity to crash, because obviously we don't want to distribute a package that crashes Unity. That's not very good. So we're going to do that. We're going to fix up some reflection issues that we're having, and then we're going to see about getting CGS working on a actual build. So let's go ahead and get started. What we left off with last session is our build process. If I can go ahead and jump into the place where that thing is. We have our build script. It's a rake file, and we're using albacore, which is a nice little Ruby gem that allows us to do all sorts of fun things. Now the problem is that when we build it, so when we actually run the build script by typing in rake here, it builds everything, it merges everything, and it actually doesn't build everything because, wow. Let's see here. Fatal exec failed. See build log for detail. Isn't this the build log? Where is the build log? I don't know. Let's try that again. Okay. So, let's figure this out first. It could be due in part with, or it could have to do with the fact that I was playing around with things and I might have accidentally, well, that's going to cause issues. I think I'm actually ignoring executables out of my repo. Let's see here. I am ignoring executables, and obviously what that's going to do is it's going to cause my IL merge from not being in the repository, and because I was playing around with my repository before class, it unfortunately resulted in IL merge no longer existing. As well as it decided to keep an old version of IL merge both in my lib and all that fun stuff, so I'm going to just remove that. I do want to go ahead and I want to ignore all EXEs. Actually, I don't want to ignore any EXEs. Why am I ignoring EXEs? That's silly. Okay, so I'm not going to ignore any EXEs. And I'm going to go ahead and reinstall. We'll talk about what's going on here. I'll go ahead and reinstall my IL merge. Oh, come on. There we go. Stop this madness. There we go. So we have our IL merge back, and it'll now be committed to our repo. So that's a good thing. Sometimes it isn't. Using NuGet's new package restore feature would be a little bit more appropriate for this, but honestly, because we have so few dependencies, I don't see an issue with committing them to the repository. Anyway, so we go ahead and type in rake, we get our project built, we get our cgs.unity.dll built, and we get our test ran, which is all good. But then, once we go in here with our cgs.unity.dll and actually try to drop it into a assets folder, we get this awesome, well, wait for it. Well, in this case, nothing happened. Or maybe something did happen. Unity's having some issues, basically, is the point that I'm trying to demonstrate, which we can see quite clearly that Unity is indeed having issues in that it is pretty much, there we go, it died. And we get a little Unity bug reporter. So obviously that's not ideal. We don't want our packages to crash Unity. And after doing quite a bit of research on this issue, I discovered that this version of ILmerge, in particular, blah, 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 where are you? Where are you, Sublime? Here you are. What are you? I don't know what you are. This particular version of ILmerge 2.13 decides to crash mono. So, that's going to be problematic. What we need is an older version of ILmerge that will work properly. So I already did find a version that does work, but let me go ahead and uninstall ILmerge again. Let's go ahead and try to install the one that I know works, 2.11. I know this works is because I used it to build the first version of CGS. So when we run this, we get this really annoying thing where NuGet basically says, this is kind of irritating, it's like installing package ILmerge, successfully installed, successfully added, blah, blah, blah. Then it's like, oh wait, you don't really want this package, do you? Then it removes it. Then it uninstalls it, and it's really obnoxious. I do not want to use chocolatey, however you pronounce that. I don't want to use that for ILmerge because that installs it globally on the system. Because our project is dependent on a very specific version of ILmerge, I want the version of ILmerge that we need to be located within our repository, or at least within a packages.xml file that can be restored on the build server so that we don't have to worry about the different versions. Now, fortunately, the version after the one that doesn't install, but before the one that crashes Unity, happens to work just fine. So go ahead, fire up your Package Manager console, which you can get through your Tools window, Library Package Manager console, and install ILmerge, specifically version 2.12.0803. Go ahead and hit enter. And it's already exists because I've been playing around with my my repo before class, but this will properly install the correct version. So now the only other thing that we need to do is jump back into our build file and change which version of ILmerge we're using, as that directory no longer exists. So to get that directory, it's going to be under Source, Packages, and then ILmerge. So I'm just going to grab this name and I'm going to dump it right here. Okay, so now I can jump back into my my root of my repository, fire up a PowerShell window, and type in rake. This will build our project just like before, it'll merge it just like before, and it'll run all of my tests, which all pass. And it'll give us a nice little cgs.unity.dll that happens to not crash Unity. Now the problem is that if I try to open up Unity again to this project that I made, it won't actually open. It'll just keep on saying that it's crashing. And that's because it's trying to re-import the package that I have on the file system that happens to crash it. So let me go ahead and jump into the file system, jump into my project, go into my assets, delete the old cgs.unity.dll, fire Unity up again, run it. It'll open this time, but as you see, we no longer have our cgs.gui. So now I can go ahead and plop this in, and we now have an assembly reference. Okay, so does this make sense to everyone? Is anybody even still awake? The moral of the story is that we need a very specific version of ILmerge, and by doing that and re-merging our DLL, we can now successfully drop it into Unity, which is nice. And that's really all we need. I'm going to go ahead and create a C# file. You're using Unity 2.4. I'm pretty sure I'm using Unity 2.0. Am I using Unity 2.4? I'm using Unity 4.1. The last release. Well, meh. I don't know why it's saying that I'm up to date, even though I'm on 4.1. Is 4.2 actually released then? Why isn't it auto-updating? I guess it is released. Huh. Well, I'll get that updated after class. Thanks, Unity. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and create a C# file called test GUI, and I'm also going to create a folder called streaming assets. And I'm going to create, I'm going to open this up in Explorer, jump into here and create a styles.cgs file. Open this up in Sublime Text, set its syntax highlighting to less, and I'll move this off the screen. So now we have our styles and our test GUI. So I'm going to sync the MonoDevelop project and manually open up the SLEN because I've been having issues with Unity trying to open up MonoDevelop, which is really obnoxious. So I'm just going to wait for that to run, and then I'm going to go ahead and jump into stuff c#.slen. And let's go ahead and use CGS to build up a quick GUI for us. In here. There we go. Assets, test GUI. So test GUI is a mono behavior. I'm going to go ahead and mark this as public so ReSharper stops complaining about it not being used. And then I'm going to create a public void on GUI. So inside of start, what do I need to do? I need to go ahead and do CGS environment dot instance dot load style sheet, and then I'm going to load up styles.cgs. Then on GUI, let's go ahead and do CGS GUI build G for GUI, and then we can do g.h1 hello world g.class header or something, and then we can do if g.button low, then click count, and then g dot, I don't know, label you click the button x times. Okay. Alright, so here's our very simple GUI. I can jump back into Unity, drag my test GUI onto my main camera, hit run, and see what happens. Okay, so we get an object reference not set to an instance of an object, and we get that, I think that could be because style CGS is blank. I don't know why I'm on a, let's go ahead and go into free aspect. Okay, so now we no longer get that error. And, oh, header. And there's our hello world, and it's red. And then my button, I can go ahead and give it a background dark gray, color of white, padding of 10 pixels, and then go ahead and do button active, background, something like that, and button hover, colors, I don't know, something like that, whatever. So now we have a button, and we have a you click the button 7 times. I can go ahead and give the header a padding of 10 pixels, maybe get the button a padding of 5 pixels vertically, 10 pixels horizontally, and then style our label to have a padding of 2 pixels. Okay, so, well, that was easy. I did get a complaint about CGS not working with reflection, and I'm not seeing that behavior in this particular thing. Okay, well, it looks like we can go ahead and jump back into our main project. It looks like the issue was that inside of CGS Engine, instead of registering our property types like this manually, there was, if using reflection, we run into an issue apparently with the merging. Now, I wouldn't necessarily do this myself, and the reason I wouldn't is because well, I'll just show the code that a person was using to register the property types. I'll explain why I wouldn't use it, and then I'll show how we can fix it. The problem I have here is the reliance on the existence of a property called p-type, and the performance isn't really a concern because this is only ever going to be ran once, but let's go ahead and do it anyway. So instead of doing this multiple times, I'm going to use reflection to find all of our properties, and that should be fairly easy to do, because I should just be able to say for each var type in assembly, or I can just say type of CGS engine .assembly .get types, and then what I need to do is I need to make sure that it does inherit or implement the iProperty interface. So I can say if not type of iProperty is assignable from type, then continue. Next up, it needs to have a static property called p-type. So I can say var property info equal, or how about p-type property equals type get property, passing in p-type, and then I'm going to pass in some binding flags. I'm going to pass in static, and I'm going to pass in public, because it's going to be a static public property on any of these types. Then if this does not return anything, it's going to return null, so I'm going to say if p-type property equals null, then continue. Finally, if we get that, then we can go ahead and register it. We can register it simply by saying register property type, passing in the property type, which is going to be p-type property dot get value. Get value on a property type will return our value from our thing, and then I'm going to pass in null, and I'm going to pass a new object 0. The reason I do that is well, hold on. Property type. Wait a second. Is this an iProperty type? It is, isn't it? P-type. That's a property base. Property base implements that. Property type. Okay, good. I'll also go ahead and make sure if it's null or p-type property dot property type, or type of iProperty type is assignable from, negate that. Okay, so that's how I would handle using reflection to acquire all of our default properties. So I can now remove all of this code, jump back into our, or build this, of course. Jump back into our thing, not right there, we want right here, and hit run, and we see that it works just fine, although we do have a header that's jumping from side to side because I forgot to remove the margin code. Let's go ahead and remove the margin code and then see about getting this to work when used in conjunction with IL merge. So I'm going to jump into my CGS builder. I can't even remember what I called it. CGS GUI Builder, GUI Adapter, something. I called it something. CGS GUI Builder, that's what I called it. And I'm going to remove my invocations to calculate margins, and I can go ahead and remove all of this code because we are using source control. Anyway, So now that I've done that, I'll go ahead and rebuild by hitting F6, jump back into Unity, hit run. This is the wrong project. Go back into this, hit run. And hey, look, our header no longer jumps back and forth. But the important thing to see is that we are indeed registering all of our default properties correctly. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to run this through IL merge and make sure that it still works with our that was the right rake, right? What is it? What folder am I in? I am in the right folder. Good. Okay, so let's go ahead and do a build, and then I'm going to jump into our build folder, and I'm going to replace CGS. Oh, come on, Unity. Stop that madness. I'm going to replace it with that. Then I'm going to hit run, and everything still works. Just to make sure that we aren't doing anything silly, I'm going to open up ILSpy. ILSpy. And I'm going to make sure that our changes did indeed get sent in. Because if it didn't, then I don't know. I just want to make sure that everything's still working. If I go into cgs.engine, look at CGS engine, register default property types, as we can see here, we do indeed see our reflection code being used. And you can also see an example of the compiler optimizing our for each loop because we're iterating over an array. It turned it into a for loop for us. So that was nice of it. Anyway, the point is that our reflection code is indeed working with Unity. And again, just to look at that code again, oh, shut up. Just look at our code again on CGS engine. So again, we loop through every single type in the assembly that contains CGS engine. We make sure that it implements iProperty. We retrieve the p-type static public property from it. We make sure that it is not null. Actually, I'm going to, if p does not equal null, I'm going to do that. And not. If it's not null, no. And if it is, no. I'm not going to invert it. I can't think in Boolean logic today. The point is, we make sure that it exists, and we make sure that it's assignable from iProperty type, and then we register the property type passing in the result of getting its value out. And the reason we have to pass in null and new object to 0 is because the only two overloads of getValue for the property info class require an object instance as well as an object array for the indexes you would pass into a index property. Unfortunately, these don't default to anything. So if you have a static property or static anything, you always pass a null into the instance of the object parameter, and if you are not working with an index property, you pass a new object of 0 length. So that should go ahead and work. So I'm looking at this code. I'm trying to figure out why this wouldn't have worked. Property namespace. I do want to figure out why this doesn't work. Let's go ahead and just rewrite this real fast. I'm just going to paste this directly in. I'm going to figure out why this code doesn't work, because I think it should. Not sure if I would use a query syntax for that, but let's figure out why it doesn't work, because that's bugging me. I hate things I don't understand. Okay, so that works just fine. Let's jump back into my build tool, re-merge it. Wait a year. Okay, so our build was successful. I'm going to go ahead and remove CGS, the old CGS Unity, jump back into my build folder, bring down the new one, hit run, and see what happens. Okay, so we get a bunch of null reference exceptions. I'm sure we're probably looking at registered default property types. Object reference not set to an instance of an object on blah. Why would this cause a null reference exception? Okay, so from property in assembly get types where type of property is assignable from T and T full name ends with property. Where property does not equal null and property namespace does not equal null and property namespace does not equal type of color property base. Any type equals property, get property type. Why would this all of a sudden break? Let's see if our thingy rewrote it in a stupid way. And by thingy I mean IL merge, and by stupid way I mean a way in which our code breaks. So let's go ahead and disassemble it and see what came out of our awesome IL merge operation. Okay, so we get this. Get assembly type of list of iProperty types. Types equals from. Let's not do that. Wow, that looks worse. Never mind. I don't know why I thought that would look better. Select T into property. And property is not null. Property namespace is not equal null. Property namespace does not equal the type of property type. Property get property. Property should never be null. By the time it gets to that let. If that second null argument was causing a problem with get value, our stack trace would look different, so it's not that. Let's look at that stack trace again. Where exactly is it failing? It's failing on display class. Wonderful. Before it though, it's create select iterator. Dot move next. Create select iterator. So it's having an issue maybe with how can any of this ever be null ever? This is silly. And only after merging too. The thing that irritates me the most is the fact that it seems to work just fine here. I mean, obviously it's registering the property types. And my code worked just fine. But this code effectively does the same thing. Just a little bit different syntax. Okay, I'm going to do that, recompile, rebuild, so I can get a better stack trace. And then that'll tell me exactly which line it's failing on. Or, oh no, it won't tell me which line it's failing on because Unity doesn't. It might be getting me a little closer. I wish Unity understood PDBs. Maybe Unity does understand PDBs these days. Let's see if it does. It does not understand PDBs. Wonderful. It doesn't understand PDBs. That seems like something they should add. Okay, let's analyze this code even further. So for each type in assembly, get types. If type of iProperty is assignable from T and type full name ends with property, T does not equals null. I mean, that's always true, so I'll go ahead and remove it. I wonder if it's this namespace check. Although I'd be curious as to why any of this would throw a null reference exception. Let's just start removing code and seeing if we can even get it to work. Okay, so I'm going to jump back into build, jump back into... Actually, just so I don't bore you guys with me switching through screens, I'm going to use one of my awesome other monitors to do this stuff while we're working, and I'll just tell you guys if it worked or not. Because I'm getting tired of opening up that folder all the time. Alright, let's run this, and we still get a object reference outset to an instance of an object. Okay. So what else could be failing? What could possibly throw a null reference exception? Well, I know this can't, that can't, this can't. Well, no, really, no, huh. That would be silly. But I've pretty much already established that whatever the problem is, it's something stupid. Okay, it's not that one. Okay, so I know types is instantiated. I know type of iProperty will never return null. I know t.fullname should never return null. Return null? It shouldn't ever. If t isn't null, full name should never return null. Well, let's go ahead and just rule out all of that garbage. I'm going to go ahead and delete. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and remove all that stuff. Now, I know this isn't actually going to work or do anything that I want it to, but what it will do is it'll give us a crap ton of test errors. But that's totally cool. I don't really care about those tests failing because I just completely broke CGS, but I did that on purpose just to rule out it is that code. So it is this code that's failing. So all the code surrounding this is not problematic. So we do get val t.getProperty p-type with binding flags of public, static, and non-public. Get value null null. If p-type does, but we do. Why? Huh. Ooh. One of our no. What? Whoa. Yeah. Okay. This check is not redundant. Yes, it is redundant, but that doesn't matter. I just figured out what the problem is. Okay, the issue... No? Well, maybe. Let's go ahead and add those namespace checks back. If the namespace is not equal null and the namespace is not equal color property based namespace and it does not equal numeric direction namespace. So that's why you have these checks in here. But I'm willing to bet you that there is another type that's being merged in that implements, yeah, from the test. No, but I don't merge the tests. Do I merge the tests? That would be dumb if I did. Pretty sure I don't merge the tests. Do I merge the tests? I don't merge the tests. Let's go ahead and look at our iProperty and okay, CGS engine. These are all CGS engine, CGS engine, CGS engine. Okay, so we have this abstract. Now the problem, I bet, is because it's picking up on these guys, picking up my abstract things. But that's why you have that namespace check in there, huh? If t.namespace is not equal null and the type namespace does not equal, and the namespace does not equal numeric direction, why would you do this check? I don't know. I shouldn't have anything that implements iProperty in this namespace. No, I don't. The only namespace you don't want to include is this abstract one, but I'm willing to bet that that's somehow being picked up for some reason. Let's see which one it fails on. I don't know why I didn't think of doing this before. Give me a sec. Okay. Let's go ahead and do that and see which one it fails on. I don't know why I didn't realize. See, that's why I don't like using reflection for this sort of thing. Okay. How did I not see this? See, I told you it'd be something really stupidly simple. That's how most of these problems go. Alright, do you want to see which type it's choking on? Do you really want to see it? Because you're going to, Alright, here you go. The type that it fails on is CGS base abstract iProperty. The interface itself. I don't know why I didn't think of this before. That's so obvious. Because the base assembly gets merged into the same assembly, so technically they're all in the same assembly. And of course, iProperty is assignable from iProperty, and iProperty ends with property. So does that make sense? I can't believe it took me that long to figure it out myself. Yeah, I feel stupid. Okay, anyway, I wouldn't, either way, that's just, I showed you an example of how I would do the reflection before, but I am going to go ahead and, if I can find you, here you are, I'm going to go ahead and revert that. Okay. So the last thing, I guess, unless there are any questions, actually I'm going to go ahead and download Unity 4.2 right now, just to make sure that all of my stuff still works with it. So this is going to take a few minutes. Are there any questions about this sort of stuff? Because we do have, at this point, we have a fully, I mean, not fully functional, I suppose, but a fully workable implementation of this, and it includes a lot of really interesting bits. I hope people had fun going through this stuff, especially with our awesome tree grammar and stuff. Ooh, actually, there is one thing I want to implement. Instead of, I want to be able to do active. I want to be able to do ampersand and then add on additional selectors. I also want to do something like this. So something like that. So I want to go ahead and implement that. While Unity's downloading, or we can go ahead and just get started on this real fast, and then we'll take the break. So let's go ahead and write some tests for this. I want to go into my... I don't want to worry about that. That's my selector engine. What test do I want to do it in? Parser tests? Well, I can start with... No. Well, yeah. No. Maybe. Nah. Let's not worry about that. Let's do our builder tests. Okay. So let's go ahead and say public void immediate nested rule works. So for the immediate nested rule, we need a style sheet, which is going to be parse CGS, do test, and then I'm going to say greater than blah, color red. So sheet.rules, there should be 2 rules in here, but one of them needs to be, or needs to have a single selector that looks like dot test blah. No reference exception. Where is that failing at? I say, why am I getting no reference? That's silly. Shouldn't happen. No reference exception. Oh, we got no reference exception because my builder is null. And I get a no viable alt exception. Why is my builder null? My builder shouldn't be null, not in my builder tests. Come on, where did I put that? Put that in builder test. I said parse CGS. We set a builder. Oh, because we don't set the builder. What? What am I missing here? Builder is null. Why is builder null? Let's look at our call stack and figure out why our builder is null, because it shouldn't be. Compile. Okay, so this is our parser. Oh, we never passed the builder into our CGS parser. Yeah. Okay, so now we should get an actual error that we can work with. Sweet. So we get a no viable alt exception. So let's go ahead and fire up our ANTLR builder, or ANTLR file watch or whatever. Jump into our compiler, and let's start off with fixing our parser. So we're getting a no viable alt. because in our rule we have declaration, or we have a selector's predicate. Now, since the selector can't actually start with a... Okay. Right, because the selector can't start with a greater than symbol. So alternatively, what we could do is do a... Do I have a greater? Yeah, I do have a greater. A greater than... or a caret. Okay, so we have our caret symbol, or where's it? It's ampersand derp. If I can find it. I hate that character. It's way too far in the numbers. Anyway, so we have our character greater than or our ampersand, and our ampersand will be used to attach on additional things. So we can do a greater than or an ampersand. Rules plus equals rules. Okay, undefined rules plus equals rule derp. Compiling CGS done. Okay, so we just recompile. Let's rerun all of our tests. It's very nice to have unit tests when writing a language. And everything broke. Of course. So is it failing on because of the greater or because of the ampersand predicate? Looks like it's breaking on both. Wait, what? What did I do? How did I manage to break it that badly? Or break it that well, I suppose, depending on your... All I did was add... Huh? It really doesn't like that token. Like, it really doesn't like that token. Did I repeat this token somewhere else? No? Does not like the name, or does not like the value, does not like the syntax. What am I not building a project? No, I'm building a project. What happens if I just do AMP is that? And that breaks everything. Oops, that's because I'm forgetting a semicolon. It really doesn't like this token. In fact, I'm starting to get the impression that it doesn't like any additional token that I put in. How is this? Yay. Oh. Ah. No, I know what's wrong. Sorry, guys. I knew I had to do something with this. Okay, the problem is that while I'm recompiling the CGS .g3 file, which changes my shared tokens file, I am not recompiling my CGS3 tree to take advantage of the updated tokens. So that's why it is blowing up. So all I have to do is trigger a rebuild of my CGS tree, and hey look, everything works now. Sorry about that, guys. Okay, so now let's go ahead and add in our let's add in our ampersand. No, we don't need a grader because we already have a grader. Okay, let's add in this so we can have an amp selectors O curly, and then we can have our grader selectors O curly. This should at least get rid of this no viable alt exception, at the very least. It does not get rid of the no viable alt exception. Mismatched token. Greater than. Let's make sure that my syntax is actually correct. And let's also go ahead and hide. Okay, so it seems that I broke all nested rules by doing that. Gratter. There we go. I think we got our nested rules to working in, but now we are mismatched tree node, unexpected, expected end of file. Why did you expect the end of the file? That's stupid to expect. I'm going to go ahead and take all this stuff and I'm going to dump it into ANTLR Builder and see what ANTLR Builder has to say about the situation. Or ANTLR Works is what it's called. Shut up. Okay, new G files, CGS. Let's go ahead and overwrite that. Jump back in Visual Studio, grab our failing code, jump it into the, or put it into the debugger. Oh. Our is last token white space. I'm just going to have this return false. I don't need this. That's because that's invalid Java code, because when you run it through the debugger, unfortunately it... Seriously? Oh, it's not bool, it's boolean. Because we're now compiling its Java, not C#. Identifier expected. Throws. Oh, no, yes, no. What? Okay, let's just remove that entirely. Why is it... Oh, because I... Maybe? Why would it do this to me? frustrating because I have to go ahead and remove all of the things that makes this specific to C#. Which means I have to effectively remove all of my actions, such as my thing, because of the differences between C# and Java. Which has less to do with the language and more to do with the API. Okay, we're getting closer. What doesn't it like now? Cannot find symbol. Substring. I have another substring somewhere. Here it is. Oh, you gotta be kidding me. No suitable method found for create. This is killing me. Let's just take out all of our constructors. We don't need any of this to do what we're trying to do. Which, by the time we get this to work, I'm going to forget what we're trying to do. Okay. Class selector, test, open. We get a no viable alt exception. Right there. Now... So what does it try, what does it think that we're doing? It thinks that it just backs up into another rule. So that's what it's doing. I don't know why, because I clearly have my amper greater question marks followed by selectors O curly. And we're back. Apparently I was on mute for like the last 5 minutes on the recording, so I apologize for that. The point is that we do have things working. As we see, our predicate indeed does match correctly, and as a result, we can now correctly parse out our subrules and have them have an ampersand or a greater than symbol, which will affect the relationship of the selectors. So now I'm going to port this back over into our CGS grammar right here. So what I did was I created another rule called a subrule. And a subrule can have a ampersand or a greater, possibly followed by a rule. And then I say rules plus equals subrule. So that allows those things to be matched. Now, this won't actually make my test pass, but what it will do, let's start that again. Won't actually, amp or greater than selectors, oh curly, amp or greater. Oh, yeah, that's fine. This is actually the tree grammar that's complaining. Good. So our rule, our parser rule, is not complaining, and that's the important part. So now that our parser rule isn't complaining, we can move on to creating our AST. And so seriously? How am I even? It's because the button is on this little thing, and whenever it like drags across my desk, it hits it, and it just fails miserably. Okay, so for our subrules, I actually do kind of want to change the AST just a tad. I want to introduce a subrule token that has a relationship. And it'll be either a descendant, an immediate descendant, or it'll be a combination. Now, again, because I did change my my generated tokens, I do need to jump back into my tree and regenerate my tree grammar. I'm going to do that just by touching the file, and that'll cause my my little builder tool to pick up on that. So I want so let's see. If it's okay, we can do it this way. Actually, I can say if it's an ampersand followed by a rule, then we want to pass in a subrule, which I need to introduce my subrule token in here. We want to introduce a subrule. And if it's an ampersand, that means it's a combination. And then we want to place in our rule. Okay, that looks good. Next up, if it's a greater rule, then we pass in an immediate descendant. So subrule, immediate descendant, rule. Finally, if it's none of these things, then if it's just a rule, I want to pass in subrule descendant rule. Now, this will actually break, well, it won't even compile. It does not like line 61. Why doesn't it like line 61? Line 61 doesn't like that for some reason. let's jump back into ANTLR Works and see why it doesn't like that. Subrule, blah, blah, blah. Let's go ahead and introduce my subrule token and my combination token. Save that out, and let's do another debug. Let's try that again. Okay, errors reported in console. No viable. Can't look backwards more than one token in this stream. Why doesn't it like that? Parser never encountered. If you want to insert tokens nearest to the parser didn't encounter, you'll need to find them in the tokens of your grammar. Oh. That's because I'm not creating a new tree node. There we go. Okay, so I still have a problem. The problem is that all of my subrule stuff is now going to be broken. And that's because I now need to match, or I now need to go into my CGS tree grammar and fix it. So the rule has a list of rules, but it actually won't. It'll have a list of subrules. And a subrule is going to be one of these three things. So I can go ahead and take this and dump it in here. And then I can remove all of that. So it's going to match one of these three items. So by doing this, what should happen is it should get rid of my ANTLR warnings, although it still won't work. Okay, my parser test will fail because I changed the syntax of my my tree. But that's easy to fix because I can just take what was printed and I can replace it with what I expect. Because, like I said, I'm fundamentally changing the way that things work. Okay, so that should fix all of those. Sweet, so now we just have a problem with this. It's actually, the funny thing about this is this will actually work for everything already, all my existing code, but now I can add in some additional actions to represent the AMP or greater than relationship. That's because if we look at, or whoops, I wanted to open up my CGS tree. If we look at our builder, our iStyle builder, no, our iStyle sheet builder as a parent. But in addition to a parent, I also want to pass in a relationship. I also want to be able to say if that parent is related by an immediate descendant, a combination, or just a normal descendant. And I can do that with an action. So I can say something like rules style builder dot set next style relationship. Actually, no, I can do it even better than this. You guys want to see a magic trick? ANTLR actually supports passing parameters into rules. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to open up the ANTLR reference book, which I have sitting here somewhere on my Dropbox. I'm going to find out what exactly that syntax looks like. Pragmatic bookshelf, definitive ANTLR reference, definitive ANTLR reference PDF. And let's look for passing parameters into rules. Stop that madness. Okay, parameters. Is it? Let's just Control F on parameters. Here we go, parameters. Okay, so you define attributes in the form of parameters to value set by invoking rules. This can contain information about the rules context. They can use the blah blah blah. That's good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce a new enum called rule relationship that is either going to be a descendant, an immediate descendant, or a immediate descendant, or a combination. Then inside of my CGS tree, I'm going to have my rule. What's that syntax look like again? Looks like, so rule relationship. By default, we're going to pass in a relationship of descendant, even though that doesn't actually matter. And the reason that doesn't matter is because I'm not going to be taking advantage of the relationship except for when I create a parent style. But when I invoke it on my subrule, on my combination, I'm going to pass in rule relationship dot combination. Here I'm going to pass in rule relationship dot immediate descendant. And then here I'm going to pass in rule relationship dot descendant. Save that out. And we're compiling. So now I can pass my relationship parameter into my builder.createStyle method. Now, of course, although ANTLR will compile this, it won't compile in C#, and that's because I don't actually have an overload of createStyle that takes in a relationship. So we can go ahead and fix that real fast by jumping into my iStyleSheet builder and adding in a rule relationship. Then I'm going to implement the members in my derived doohickey guys. I'll do this. I have a style sheet builder right here that's just used for okay, so I have two style sheet builders that I have to fix this interface for, or this interface implementation for. This one is just going to ignore it. It doesn't need it. My test one. Oh no, that's my CGS internal. This one will need it. The one that won't need it, however, is my test one, which is this. This is just going to return that. That's fine. I don't care about that. But for my real one, my real builder, I'm going to need to pass in the relationship that I was created with. However, let's go ahead and just build out everything, and let's rerun all of my tests just to make sure I haven't completely borked anything. And I haven't. The only thing that's failing is the thing that has been failing. But if we click on it, we'll see there are no more ANTLR warnings, so that's good. Now we have our relationship in our createStyle method. So this enum determines if the parent style needs to be combined with the parent selectors, added as immediate descendants to the parent selectors, or added as descendants to the parent selectors. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new relationship parameter to my style builder class, and it's going to be called parent relationship. The parent relationship is going to be used when we create our parent, or when we use our parent to do our building. So builder equals new selector builder passing in selector.build. Our selector builder, so we need to change this. This is what we need to change. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to propagate my parent relationship into my selector.build, or sorry, my selector builder constructor. By doing that, adding a parameter, and now we have propagated all the way down into our selector builder if the, so for example, if we had a greater than sign or an ampersand used right here. So now I can go ahead and say switch on parent relationship. That's going to change my relationship. So we can have a descendant, an immediate descendant, which turns it into an immediate descendant, or we can have a combination, which turns it into a none. And as you see, our awesome test now passes. So we now have correctly inserted the immediate descendant relationship into our selector. So let's try another one. This time I'm going to do immediate nested rules works for pseudo selectors. What I mean by that? Well, instead of doing greater than blah, I'm going to do at active. So the resulting selector that should be returned out of processing this nested rule should look like .test : active. Now I don't think this one's going to pass. Right, we're running into a mismatched tree node, unexpected. Right. Let's ignore that one for now. Let's add a class to it. Okay, adding a class to it works. That's good. So this is working correctly. Now let's make it work for pseudo selectors. So this is for additional selectors, and then let's do one for pseudo selectors. So let's do : active. So that should be test : active. The reason this is failing is because neither my tree parser nor my parser is set up to handle selectors that are literally just a pseudo selector. We can fix that because I think that's just an arbitrary limitation that I put on the grammar itself. Because if we look here, we see selectors is a selector, which is a selector type followed by an optional pseudo selector followed by a child selector. If I make the child selector or the selector type optional, that would how does that work with my builders, though? Because if I look at my style builder, or sorry, my selector builder, I need a none selector. Because my pseudo selectors are being attached to objects, I need a way to represent an empty selector that just contains pseudo selectors and potentially child selectors. So we have our ID selector, our class selector, an element selector, and a pseudo selector. I'm also going to add an empty selector. And then what I'm going to do on my selector right here is I'm going to say on my selector type, which is a class selector, ID selector, element selector, it can either be this or it can be a pseudo selector followed by a child selector. There we go. This will have selector, empty selector, pseudo, pseudo selector, child selector. Undefined rule, because I don't know how to spell pseudo apparently. Oh, derp. Nope, derp. Stop this madness. Awesome. So now we have a empty selector. So now we can go into our tree grammar and we can go into our selector type, selector type. We have our selector type, and we can say if we run into an empty selector, then we will say selector builder dot set empty selector. Now that's going to require that we completely blow up our ANTLR grammar because I have a syntax. There we go. That's going to necessitate. What now, ANTLR? What are you wanting? Did I misspell empty selector? It's not going to be following an ident. Okay, you gonna work now? No, you're not gonna work. Okay, it looks like we are running into a problem with line 77 of CGS tree. If we jump into 77, we have empty selector. Does anybody see where the syntax error is? It's kind of a pain without syntax highlighting. What's the error? No viable alt exception. Well, yeah. Looks like the only exception that ANTLR throws is no viable alt. It's quite meaningless, to be honest. So this works, right? That works. This doesn't. Why doesn't this work? I shouldn't need to select on an identifier. Okay, according to ANTLR, I do need to select on an or have an identifier there. Maybe if I change where this is matched. Why do I need an identifier token? I don't want an identifier token. Okay, well it likes that. So let's go back to our tree and... Oh, yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Because we're not actually... derp. Derp, derp, derp. Okay. So now we need to actually add a set empty selector onto our selector builder. So let's jump into our selector builder, say set empty selector, have ReSharper implement this in my my types. This one I want to do, this one I need to, because this is my composite selector builder, so I just need to loop through every single selector in my sub builders and say set empty selector. And then on this one, I'm going to do nothing. The only implementation that matters is the one that's in CGS internal selector builder. Now what this is going to do is it's going to do nothing more and instantiate an empty selector, passing in my top selector and no relationship. So my empty selector is a selector that'll literally return true for everything. The only reason I have it is just for being able to select on pseudo classes. Okay, so what do you complain? Oh, it's public. Okay, what are you complaining about again? Oh yeah, we need base weight. The weight will always be 0. Get textual representation of selector will always return an empty string. Does match will always return true. We need a parent, but we don't need anything else. Our relationship will be none, and our pseudo classes will be an enumerable dot empty of string. Okay, so there's our selector builder. Let's go ahead and run all of our tests and see what happens. And hey, look, our immediate nested rule works for pseudo selectors. And of course, since all of our other tests pass, all of our other tests pass, should be able to go ahead, do another build of this. Plop it right into our Unity project, which is somewhere. Oh, I closed it out, didn't I? I'm going to delete cgs.unity out of that, and I'm going to re-import it. So now, according to this code, we have a button, right? And we also have a active state on it. Let's go ahead and add a hover state on it. And then let's remove our active and hover from here. And on our label, let's go ahead and do a hover state color red. And then let's add a dot group. The dot group h1 will have a color of blue. And then the way that I'm going to write the GUI code is going to look like this. I'm going to say g.div g.class group will have an immediate parent of h1. This should be blue. And then we'll have another element inside of it, another h1 inside of it. So g.h1, this should not be blue. Okay. So if we go ahead and jump to Unity and hit run, our hover states work, our headers are correctly colored, and our active state works as well. So, we have successfully modified the language to support the ampersand syntax for pseudo classes, as well as using a greater than symbol to have a nested rule considered as an immediate descendant of the parent rule. So how's everyone feeling? While you guys wake up, I'm going to go ahead and install Unity 4.2 because I want to see if everything works properly with 4.2, because I would cry if it didn't. Okay, not good. The change broke the syntax, and ANTLR gave you errors. Well, here's my combined grammar. Are you having issues with the combined grammar or the tree grammar? Okay, so the combined grammar. Well, so what we did was, it's important that your predicate right here contains the ampersand and greater than condition, because otherwise it won't properly match subrule. And then subrule is a new parser rule that also matches against ampersand and greater. The redundancy isn't an accident, actually. The way this predicate works is that it tells ANTLR, okay, well, find a declaration, and if you can't find a declaration, go ahead, try to find an ampersand or a greater than symbol, maybe, because of the question mark, then try to find some selectors, then try to find a no curly. And if you do, back all the way out, and then apply a subrule to it. So your predicate has to contain within it the same tokens that will be matched by whatever the result of the predicate is, if that makes sense. So what I'm saying is that it can't look like this, for example, because then this predicate would never match ampersands or graders. Or it can't look like that, because then it won't match selectors that aren't, or nested rules that don't have an ampersand or greater. And that's really the only changes that we made. Other than down here, we added a compound relationship, and then we also added on our selector type, we matched against a pseudo selector, removing the question mark, because there's only two valid options here. Either we have a proper selector type, such as a class, element, or ID, followed potentially by a pseudo selector and potentially followed by multiple child selectors, or we have a pseudo selector followed by potentially multiple child selectors. Those are the only two alternatives on this rule. So those were the changes that were made to the combined grammar for the lexer and the parser. Everything else should be the same. And wow, it certainly takes a decent amount of time to install Unity 4.2. I'll go ahead and pause the video while it's installing. And we're back. Unity 4.2 is installed. Let's see if it works. Yeah, seems to be just fine. What is new in Unity 4.2? Windows Phone 8. Woo! And Perforce integration. Meh. Oh, right. This is the one that introduces the support for, like, everything, isn't it? That's cool that supports Windows Phone now. Alright, so unless there are any more questions, I think we can go ahead and wrap up. Hope everyone learned something. Alright, I'll see you guys all next week.